I'm going to try this again. So, I was in the process of writing down some memories, typing out my thoughts about Kari Walker, good friend growing up, who passed away yesterday, or actually 2 days ago now. It's after midnight. Then before that, I was writing a prayer, thoughts about Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, for those of us who have gone through chemotherapy, know that cancer battle and hope that she stays strong so she could keep fighting for us on the Supreme Court. But then as I was writing about Kari, about to post some stuff, across the news feed came that Congressman John Lewis passed away. That one hits hard. That one's really deep. So I just wanted to share with you my thoughts, my tribute, my memories of John Lewis. Here's the picture of him and I that was taken 4 years ago. Here is his graphic novel book set that was released several years ago. These aren't things that I ran around the house to try to find to prop up. The picture was on the wall. The books were on the shelf. I just brought them down. I just put them in front of the camera. This is probably one of the more important and more serious podcasts or talks or whatever you want to call this that I'll ever do. So, John Lewis, and you're going to hear a lot of people say this, and I'm just one in a million. John Lewis was truly one of my heroes. John Lewis was one of the most important people I have ever learned about, that I ever wanted to know about, one of the people that I always in my life wanted to meet. Dr. Dorothy Height would be the other one, and they were both very instrumental in the civil rights movement. Growing up, whenever we had to write a paper or essay or something for Black history or any type of history, my grandparents would not let me take the easy way out. They said, you're not going to do Rosa Parks. You're not going to do Martin Luther King. Everybody else is going to do that. You need to learn about other people in our history. So my grandparents, Vivian and Lula Taylor, they made me learn about John Lewis because he was one of the big six of the civil rights movement, along with Martin Luther King and others. He was one of the only people from that civil rights movement who went into national politics. They all did great things in their life, but he became a congressman, and it was in his first or second term that my grandparents made me. I want to say forced at the time, but I'm glad they did. They forced me to learn about John Lewis. They forced me to learn about Dr. Dorothy Height, and I am forever grateful because anytime that I had to write a paper, an essay, a project, Dorothy Height and John Lewis were my go-tos. So as time went on, I admired him more. I followed him, and he inspired me to do great things that I never quite accomplished, but anyhow, he is important. I love the man. So all this being said, it was about 2016, or it might have been 2015 around. One of my friends who's a writer said, did you know John Lewis is going to put out a manga? I'm like, what? And he says, yeah, he's going to put out a manga on his life. And I'm thinking, manga, anime. He's going to put out a manga like a Naruto or a Dragon Ball Z version of his life. That's going to be kind of strange. But then I got clarification. It meant he was going to make a graphic novel about his life. And one of his aides, Andrew Iden, one of the staffers, was going to co-write it with him. And it was going to be epic. So then I was excited. I wanted it from day one. And the day it came out, I read volume 1. That's actually volume 3. I read volume 1. I read the others. And I said at that time, I cannot wait to be a teacher. If anything else, I want to become a teacher just so my kids could read this. I want to become a teacher just so they know who John Lewis is, what he represented, and how lucky we still are because he is the last living member of that big six of the civil rights movement, and he is still here with us. So, lo and behold, when I became a teacher, just this year, my 7th grade learned about John Lewis. I was able to show them the picture. I had it hanging up in the classroom. Tell them the story I'm about to tell you about meeting John Lewis. We read volume 1 of his March, his graphic novel, together. They watched the movie Selma, and by putting it all together, they were all so interested in him. I was impressed because, we have time, schedules, Common Core, whatever. We didn't have time to read all 3 volumes. We only did volume 1 as a class. But the class, about 8 of them for their projects, did John Lewis. It was almost as if John Lewis became the new Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King of essays and projects. And they were fighting over, taking turns, who got to read volumes 2 or 3. So my 7th grade really got into John Lewis's story. By 7th grade, really were starting to understand civil rights from a different perspective. And that just meant the world to me. Even tonight, and as I was setting up the phone, we recently ended class, of course we're in the summer, on the Google Classroom, which is still active. Some of the kids actually emailed me wondering how I'm feeling or letting me know that John Lewis passed away. And it's even impacting them at 13 and 14 years old, and they've only had several months to learn about him earlier this year. So 2016, almost 4 years ago, I worked for the Free Library of Philadelphia, and I got the tip that John Lewis was coming to Philadelphia. He was going to do a book signing. He was going to do a question and answer, Q&A, and the people I work with knew how much I love John Lewis. So they made sure that I would be at the Cecil B. Moore Library, and I'd have the opportunity not just to watch the Q&A, but the opportunity to talk to him and the mayor and some of the other dignitaries that were there as well. So during the actual Q&A, I got to ask a question. I asked him about, if some of you might remember, you could go back and watch, back in 2016, the summer, on July 2nd or 3rd, prior to the 4th of July, John Lewis went old school. He had a sit-in protest on the floor of the House of Representatives with many other members of the House supporting him and doing the sit-in with him. I got to ask him about that and what was behind that. The most important part of meeting John Lewis occurred after the Q&A, where me being Mr. Starstruck was thanking him, the usual thank you for all you've done and all you've accomplished and for inspiring all of us and coming and those type of things, and you've been through so much and all that type of talk. He showed us the scars on his head from Selma, from when he got beaten crossing the bridge, and as we were thanking him and honoring him, he cut me off. And he said, Michael, this is what I want you to know, and this is what I want the rest of you to know. He remembered some of our names. He said that he thinks more about the legacy, not the fact of the work he's done, because the work that he's done still needs to be done, is what he said. And he said the legacy is not to forget that whatever rights, freedoms, liberties, measures of equality that we have gained over the years, we need to work and fight every day to keep those liberties, freedoms, and rights. He said just because something is written in the Constitution or in an amendment or in a court decision doesn't mean that's the way it'll always be. It could always change. So he says, so the work continues every single day. The work continues by always having people in power that are going to keep the rights that are gained. That's the first thing he said. The second thing he said is, as as much as people always honor him and Dr. King, and he's always getting awards and accommodations for his life, he says to never forget there were a lot of women, the women of the civil rights movement, that don't get the recognition the men does. He wanted to see the women recognized more, number one. Number two, he even mentioned Dr. Dorothy Height and how it was her who taught a lot to those men. It was her who taught them even during the civil rights movement of equality for blacks and segregation, that injustice to the blacks is an injustice to everyone. So she was the one who said, let's not forget the women that are oppressed. She is the one who says we need to protect the gay lesbian community. She is at the time just the gay lesbian community, LGBTQ today. She is the one who said we need to protect immigrants, people who want to be part of this country. She's the one who said that we have to protect people so they're not discriminated against based on age, based on disability, things like that. So he was talking about specifically all the things Dr. Dorothy Height taught him over the years and how great of a lady that she was. And the other thing that he spoke on of how not only do the women need to be honored, not only do the people that still fight this movement every day need to be recognized and people need to help them, he also mentioned the white people who, from the very beginning, supported the civil rights movement, and especially the martyrs, those who, during Selma, the whites who themselves got killed or beaten or chastised or kicked out of their communities because they chose to get on this civil rights movement, and they chose to march with John Lewis, with Dr. King. And those are the things that we talked about. Those are the things he said. And those are the things that I will always take away. One of the truest and biggest honors of my life was meeting John Lewis. One of the biggest honors of my life and the highlight of my teaching career so far is the fact that he was able to inspire the 12 and 13-year-olds in my class to the point where even the night after he died, they're contacting me, wondering how I'm doing, or just telling me how sad it is or how they feel and how they'll always remember learning about John Lewis. So everyone, remember his legacy, and just remember all the work that he's done is never done, and we need to keep fighting every day for the liberties and freedoms that were gained and for more. So let's show our love. Rest in paradise, and we love John Lewis.